Hey Nubia ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today I would like to talk about the warrior queens of the Kingdom of Kush, the Kandake. Alright, welcome back. Now if you noticed, I said I would like to talk more about the Kandake, and that is because if you've been around for a while, you'll know that about a year and 4 months ago I did speak a little bit about the Kandake, specifically talking about one Kandake in particular, but it wasn't a dedicated video, and so here we are. I would like to begin by the word Kandake itself. Now what's interesting in the ancient sources is that there is an actual misunderstanding, and I'll tell you a little bit more about this, but in general the ancient Romans misunderstood the meaning of the word Kandake because they thought it was a proper name of one of the queens that they were facing, that they were talking about in the Kingdom of Kush. But in reality Kandake is not a proper name, is a title. And even though there were several types of Kandake, and today we're going to see what this specific title meant within the cultural context of this specific civilization in Africa, today we're going to focus on one in particular, which is the Kandake Amanirenas. Now the reason why I've chosen to focus this video on Amanirenas herself is because she's the one Kandake that dared to face the Romans in combat. In other words, she took advantage of a moment of weakness because, the Romans didn't think that they were in danger, and she invaded the southern border of the Roman province of Egypt, defeating 3 Roman cohorts due to numerical superiority. This was an invasion. Now that is a phenomenal tale, but what's also interesting is the other side of the coin, which we will discuss today. In other words, the Roman imperial response, also known as Roman wrath. The Kandake Amanirenas, who was a black woman, a queen, a warrior, a queen of kings in a matrilineal society, who did face the Romans and defeated them in battle, and who also had very strong connections to Egyptian culture. And while I tell you about the story of this Kandake, I will present a plethora of archaeological, literary, and historical evidence to back everything up. We're going to talk about something that happened in the southern borders of the Roman Egyptian prefecture, about the Kingdom of Kush, and a title within its society, the Kandake. To be specific in a time spectrum, we're going to talk about something that happened between the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD. Strabo tells us that in 25 BC, by orders of Augustus, the Prefectus Aegypti, Aelius Gallus, began a campaign against Arabia Felix. The overall idea behind this campaign was to secure a trade route between Rome and India that would ensure the acquisition of a numerous amount of precious spices being brought directly to the heart of the empire, creating this connection through the Red Sea. Now the overall problem with this campaign is that it was ultimately a failure, mostly due to the fact that there was the outbreak of an infectious disease or a pandemic that killed off quite a few legionaries. But this was just the beginning of Rome's problems. You see, because of all of these troops and legions that were moved and eventually lost away from the Roman prefecture of Egypt in Africa Proconsularis, Egypt now was not well garrisoned. But an enemy to Rome will take advantage of that. An enemy that the Romans themselves call and describe as ferocious. An enemy that was prepared, mobilizing their troops from the heart of Africa against the southern province of Egypt, which was under Roman control, the Kingdom of Kush. Egypt being left unguarded was the perfect opportunity for the southern neighbor of the empire. Those who Cassiodeo and Strabo call Ethiopians launched an immediate offensive with over 30,000 soldiers against the southern borders of Roman Egypt. This above-mentioned army of 30,000 strong was led by the ferocious black queen warrior, the Kandake. In the classical sources, we are always told about this so-called Kingdom of the Ethiopians, but this has generic implications, and generally speaking is intended to mean people of sub-Saharan descent, so black people. But in this case, however, when it comes to these invaders, we are talking specifically about the Kingdom of Kush. The territory of the Kingdom of Kush would correspond with the region called Nubia, divided in Low Nubia, so the Lower Nubia, which also included the southern part of Egypt, and Upper Nubia, the northern part of modern-day Sudan, for geographical reference. For slightly deeper historical context, the first Kingdom of Kerma and then Kingdom of Kush had been both tributary and adversaries to Egypt, well before the Romans entered the picture. This will be important to understand the connection of the Kandake to actual Egyptian culture, specifically to the Egyptians' high priests. Let's talk war now. According to Strabo and Cassius Dio, the Kandake is the name of the queen of the Ethiopians who attacked Egypt. but in reality it's not a proper name. That was their misunderstanding. It's a title. It's a composite term in the Meroitic language, deriving from the word Kanda, which means woman, and the particle ke, which could translate as possessor or owner. This is usually a title that is given to the sister of the king. Now here's the thing. When the king dies, and there is only the sister, because the society of the Kingdom of Kush was matrilinear, which means that she would be the mother of the prince, she would be in charge. She would be treated like the king, at least until her son would come of age. Also, some Kandake Meroitic inscriptions hold the title of Kore, which means king or sovereign, which further demonstrate that when their brother or king would die, they would become the de facto reigning ruler. In other words, they had a position equal to that of male rulers. But were they warrior queens? Well, there are a few Kandake that I would like to mention to answer that. The Kandake Amanishaketo, between the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD, is often represented with bow and arrow as she holds prisoners. The following Kandake, Amanitore, massacres enemies wielding a sword, together with her son, who instead is wielding an axe of swords. These are all direct descendants of the Kandake Amanirenas, which we are talking about today. It's not just one black warrior queen, it's a line, a whole dynasty of black warrior queens. Strabo describes Amanirenas to be manlike, masculine, and also she was blind in one eye. The initial part of the offensive is very favorable for the Kushites. In fact, they managed to completely massacre 3 cohorts that constituted the garrison of the southern borders, as they were defending the city of Siene. They then proceed to attack the cities of Philo and Elefantina. Finding almost no resistance, they managed to get slaves, but they also take something that really makes the Romans mad. The loot that they gather as they raise and sack these towns includes an amazing bronze statue of Emperor Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus Augustus. Now the Romans are outraged. They want the statue of the emperor back. So the Roman response begins. The Imperial Roman response sees the new prefect of Egyptian province, Publius Petronius, with a legion of 10,000 infantry and 800 cavalry moving south. They then reach the city of Selkis in northern Nubia. Before engaging, they demand the Kushite queen, Kandake, to give back the statue of the emperor, but she ignores them for 3 days. This is the Roman Empire we're talking about. As their demand receives no answer, the Romans deploy for combat. As the Kushite warriors led by the queen face the Romans, they are defeated in an open pitch battle, as it often happens when the Romans are faced while they do what they know how to do best, regardless of being outnumbered. However, Strabo gives us 2 specific reasons as to why the Kushite are defeated by the Romans in this massive battle. First, they tell us they were not well equipped, in the sense that the only defense that these warriors had was a tall cowhide shield and a disorganized array of swords, spears, and some axes. Second, they tell us that their captains weren't particularly professional. The town is therefore occupied by the Romans and the nearby fortress of Primis is taken. The Roman prefect Publius Petronius decides then to continue his march and go further into the Kingdom of Kush. He reaches the important city of Napata that he conquers, razes, and burns to the ground, taking the population as slaves to Egypt. Strabo then tells us that after taking Napata, the prefect decides to stop. He returns to Alexandria and leaves a strong garrison in the nearby fort. They underestimated them once, they're not gonna do it again. The Romans learned from their mistakes. The Kandake Amanirenas, however, decides to begin immediately a counter-offensive and storms the fortress, facing once again the Roman, forcing the Roman prefect to go back to defend. It is at this time that something extremely curious from a historical point of view, in fact even mysterious, happens. The Kandake writes a letter directly to Emperor Augustus, and he replies. The contents of the letter are actually quite interesting. She has a whole list of demands, and the emperor grants them all. Why? If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much. You see, archaeology in this case is extremely important because it will help us to identify the reasons behind this discrepancy between the historical tales that tell us that yes, the Kushite were strong, but the Romans just massacred them and that was the end of the situation, and then this letter which instead seems to paint a different picture. If the Kushites were defeated so easily, if the Kandake were not really that much of a problem, then why did the emperor grant their demands? Well, a temple might have the answer to our question. Specifically, the temple E292 at Meroe. In 1910, during excavations at Meroe, the ancient capital of the Kingdom of Kush, a bronze head of a Roman statue was discovered representing Emperor Augustus. This was clearly the head of the statue that they had stolen and never given back. Now here is the kicker. Where was the statue found? In this temple, buried underneath the staircase to the temple. What this means is that symbolically, every single day, pilgrims, Kushite warriors, the population, would be literally stomping on top of the head of the Roman emperor every time they would enter and exit the temple. Picture that for a moment. Also, the temple is mostly in its iconography and depictions representing scenes of war, including representing several prisoners who are clearly wearing Roman clothes. And to further identify these prisoners as Romans, which are also found in several temples in the Kingdom of Kush, we see the following word underneath. The ethnonym Tameya. The etymology of this Meroitic word is believed to begin in Egypt and in Egyptian, in fact specifically to the word THM. Now this word in Egyptian meant specifically a Libyan and a non-Egyptian from Libya. But in the Meroitic language it gains several other meanings. It means a non-Egyptian from the north. And generally this is meant to be any population that is an Egyptian and lives in the area, but we also find it several times used to mean specifically the Romans. Because at the end of the day, they were northern non-Egyptians, weren't they? And we find this word underneath the representations of what seem to be prisoners that look Roman. Now these temples were dedicated to this specific Kandake. They were built by her, and they show the Kandake taking prisoners from Rome several times. So maybe what this suggests is that even though at the end of this entire situation the Romans did overcome the Kushites and put a stop to their invasions, maybe it wasn't such an easy task as the Roman writers want us to believe it was. And it also means that perhaps there were other expeditions against Rome from the Kingdom of Kush that we are just not told about. Now, as we look at the aftermath of this clash, we could consider this a little bit of a historical pattern in the sense that it does often happen with the ancient Romans that Rome's enemies that managed to have the upper hand, maybe because there was a betrayal, maybe because they had numerical superiority, maybe because of an ambush. These enemies grow in confidence, become bold, face the Romans in pitched battles, and are defeated. Of course, it's not always the exact same, but there are several situations that are a little bit like this. I mean, think about the Battle of Teutoburg. The Romans were literally betrayed and then ambushed. Look at Boudica, who once again uses guerrilla tactics and all sorts of stratagems to be able to take the upper hand against the Romans, but then she becomes overconfident. She faces them in battle and she is defeated because that's what's amazing about the ancient Roman military machine. It was the most professional and well organized of the classical antiquity, and they were masters of logistics, and once again, fighting on pitched battles were what the Romans did best. Not to mention that in the majority of cases they were also better equipped, the only exception being a little bit with Hannibal, because of course Carthaginian armies were also very professional, which is why that was a crazy clash of titans, which is one of the reasons why Hannibal was so difficult to remove from Italy. Many people don't realize that Hannibal, when he was in Italy, and the Romans after the Battle of Cannae, they just can't get him out. They can't for a very long time. I mean, Hannibal stays in Italy for over 14 years. 14 years. Until Scipio Africanus decides, you know what, I'm gonna go for a base exchange. I'm not gonna keep on defending here, I'm going on a counterattack, and he goes all the way to Africa while Hannibal is still in Italy and decides to go for Carthage. Then they meet at Zama, and the rest is history. Well, in this case, everything is history. Yeah. As we read, in the case of the Kushites, this was a matter of also being under-equipped. So they had numerical superiority, but they were less equipped and less professional. That did work, at least for the first invasions, but it didn't work when it comes to pitched battles. The Romans are the Romans. One thing that I would like to sort of add to this video is the idea of how about the weather and the climate? Because remember, the Romans fighting in Germania, everything is really cold, it's rainy, it's wet, but what about the Romans fighting in Africa. Because of course in this case, not only we're talking about Upper Egypt, we're talking about the southern border, then they go deeper into Africa as they sort of invade some of the territories of the Kingdom of Kush. So imagine how hard it would have been. And once again, the Kushite are not really wearing much armor, which is an advantage when it comes to the climate, but a disadvantage when it comes to receiving the business end of a sword. But the Romans were in full gear. So how difficult, how tough would it have been for the Roman military machine to operate and being deployed in Africa, particularly as they go deeper into the continent? How much was dehydration a problem? How much was heat exhaustion a problem? I wish the sources told us more. And we could, as a team, look into this and try to find how much climate interferes with military operations. Now, of course, we do have to remember that the Romans did usually do their campaigns in summer, not in winter, which is why there is a massive difference when it comes to the sort of forts that they would create. Summer forts, very quickly put together. Winter forts, much more stationary and stable locations, because during winter, once again, usually they wouldn't campaign. But then again, summer in Africa is different from summer in Gaul. So let me know if that's something you'd be interested in the comments, and perhaps we could dedicate a whole episode to it. Alright, noble ones, but I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up, and if you are not yet a member of this community, become a noble one, subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. I will see you tomorrow. Goodbye.